Hello everybody, my name is Amber Devine and my hot topic will be standardized testing in higher education. So I chose to talk about standardized testing in higher education because it's been a topic for consideration for years as far as admission for students, and because it's very interesting to see, especially now with COVID, how standardized testing has become optional for admission for certain institutions. And it makes you question, was the need for standardized testing always there, or could we alter it, or does it have to have such a high stake when it comes to admissions for students? And so that was the reason why I decided to choose standardized testing in higher education and how that would affect different aspects of institutions. So let's talk a little bit about the history of standardized testing. So standardized testing, the pioneer of standardized testing came from Horace Mann in 1845 in Boston, where he questioned whether or not it was did it make sense for students to have to do oral tests versus written tests to prove their knowledge. And so Mann's goal was to find a replicate of the best teaching methods so that all children could have equal opportunities. So it originally was for the purpose of trying to level out the playing field. And so proponents argue that standardized tests offer an objective measurement of education and good metric to gauge areas for improvement, as well as offer meaningful data to help students in marginalized groups, and that the scores are good indicators of college and job success. So this is the history behind it, and some more just little things is that, and so that was just a little bit about the history of standardized testing and how it all came about. So we're going to jump into the impact that standardized testing has on students. So marginalized students do not have equitable access to study aids for standardized tests. When looking at some of the research from different backgrounds and areas, it is clear that a lot of the students that are in these environments are not able to get the resources they need to be successful to pass or get a good enough grade to get into institutions for these tests. So this test almost becomes a disadvantage for those students who are in that space, because those tests, especially, I know most of us, if we haven't all taken those tests to get into school, you know that they're different. They're definitely the wording and the way it can like one little word can kind of mess things up. So that is something that students who are in these marginalized groups are at a disadvantage with. Recall versus learned material. So just having that knowledge of being able to learn the material versus actually just remembering just for the sake of remembering for a test. They're not really taking the information in, they're just learning for the sake of the test. K through 12 school zoning and that experience the discrepancies with funding and aid allotted to those specific areas to prepare students for standardized testing. And that really just, covers all the school zoning, again, speaking about those marginalized groups and those marginalized individuals who are a part of those spaces and environments that do not allow for students to have the extra resources they need as far as funding, SAT prep, ACT prep, things of that nature that are not allowed to them because of their zoning in the schools they attend. The pandemic opened the minds of enrollment gatekeepers to understanding the true barriers of standardized testing, and that really just focused on, the option of now, because it is COVID and it's a pandemic, that the option of having standardized testing, is it really necessary? Is it something that we need to have to consider students and make sure that they're able to, they're ready to go to college? And so this is something that definitely impacts students because it's like the middle barrier, and which brings us to inconsistencies between students who have taken standardized tests to get into universities versus those who have received admission post-pandemic. This class of 2020-21, they are in a very unique environment when it comes to their admission for universities because they were not as or their admission requirements were a little bit more lax compared to those who applied prior to the pandemic. So that is a major impact that will have on our students, and we'll see that as we go into it. As far as the impact on the profession, so admission requirements must be altered to acknowledge a student holistically. And this goes to like the enrollment side of student affairs and just, admissions, because without students, what are we without students? And so the admission requirements must be altered because, again, they've already been altered because of the pandemic, but if really, if this is something that is going to continue to be a thing, then those admissions requirements will needs to be altered so those students are able to be selected holistically. Student retention will be impacted if regulations for standardized testing are altered due to the influx of applicants. And so with student retention, the rate will rise because the rate with the applicants that are accepted should rise. And so it kind of is like a math equation, if you will. And student affairs practitioners must meet students where they are at academically, and that just really means breaking it down to understand that students that were not mandated to take the standardized testing must be met where they're at academically, and just focusing on their strengths and what we can do as student affairs professionals to help them matriculate. Functional areas must collaborate to create a tightly woven net to secure the success of each individual student. And so those functional areas, such as housing and residence life, student life and engagement, multicultural engagement, those organizations or those functional areas should be able to work together to make a plan to strategically help our students to successfully be the best that they can be while on campus with us. As far as the impact on institutions, so with changing the standardized testing with the regulations, especially now, the influx of students, like I mentioned before, with standardized testing being a potential optional part of admission, the influx of students will raise because students who are typically not able to apply because of their standardized testing. And that's the thing, with a lot of these times, it really does suck because students who had a lower standardized test score but were, let's say, 4.0 students, and their GPAs were really high, they weren't able to get into those institutions that they wanted to go to because of their standardized testing. So the influx of students that will be admitted will definitely affect and impact the institutions, which in turn will be a more need for space and need for staff and need for more resources as a collective. And now we know, as higher ed and student affairs professionals, currently right now we already are we are needing more people, we are needing more space, we are needing more just resources in general. So with the influx of students and the impact on institutions as a whole when it comes to standardized testing, it will definitely be affected by that tenfold. And so the impact on stakeholders. So without the mandate of standardized testing, those standardized testing sites, companies, and employees who focus on standardized testing will majorly be affected and will continue to be affected if regulations continue to change. And so just keeping that in mind, that because it's a business at the end of the day, and so the business will be affected by that. And the student support systems will feel less of a burden for standardized testing fees, because those fees are a lot of money and they do take some time, especially with preparing students for the testing. And I personally went to SAT prep that was paid for out of pocket from my parents. That was something that I needed to do so that way I was able to attend the institution I was able to attend. So for students, it would definitely be for student support systems, they would definitely be affected if the standardized testing were eliminated or made optional from going forward completely. And so what can we do as student affairs professionals? So we can advocate for our students to be considered for admission based off of the student holistically, and meaning we can advocate for students to not just have to be looked at like a test score or a score that they only see on the sheet of paper. in addition to their references, in addition to their resume or anything else that they have that's supplemental information, the student can be viewed as a holistic person instead of the test score that meets the requirements, so then they get considered. And prepare and educate ourselves on ways to successfully support students through their matriculation. And so that just really just means, us as student affairs professionals educating ourselves on how to support students who did not have to do that extra step of applying with the SAT or ACT or any other standardized test score, and just really benefiting and supporting our students to be better students. And here are my references. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.